Pier Paolo Pasolini, the filmmaker. Contradictory, Marxist, mystic, Catholic, and atheist. Pasolini, Pier Paolo Pasolini, prolific writer and poet. 26 novels and 6 volumes of poetry.
Oh, Christ, what's this crap about Pasolini? Why the hell did Antonioni get a goddamn something?
So listen, and what do you think about Antonioni then?
Zabriskie Point I saw 5 times. Yeah. Because I saw Passion of St. Matthew according to St. John, St. Mark's, whatever the Pasolini thing. A piece of crap. Piece of crap.
È bravo, è un regista molto profondo.
E poi che ci pensa di Fellini? Più bravo
Fellini è il più grande regista che c'è sulla faccia della terra.
Ah, sì? Più grande che Pasolini?
Più grande regista.
Ah, sì?
During the last 11 years, he has written and directed 15 major films, such as The Gospel According to St. Matthew, Acatoni, Mama Roma, Oedipus Rex, Theorem, Pigsty, and recently Medea, starring Maria Callas.
Che filmi lei ha veduto di Pasolini?
If one were able to find in Pasolini's work one constant which has followed throughout his cinematic career, it would be the stress that he has placed on death. Starting with Acatoni and following all through his films, it is a subject that he has talked about a great deal.
Pasolini ha scritto una poesia circa i disordini che allora cominciavano in Italia, credo.
One underlying tendency can be discerned in Pasolini's career. He lays increasing stress on the need to restore an epic and mythological dimension to life, a sense of awe and reverence to the world, a sense which he maintains the peasantry still possess, though the bourgeoisie has done all in its power to destroy it.
Il poliziotto è uno sfruttato, però da lì diciamo...
In Rome, Italy, 1968, Pasolini wrote a poem relating to confrontations during the first large student manifestations, and in a completely surprising and unexpected way, he takes the part of the police. Making a racist accusation against the students because they are the sons and daughters of the bourgeoisie. Pasolini has not been able to take a valid political viewpoint, but as on so many other occasions has expressed his own personal and subjective thoughts.
Ma è molto semplice, d'altra parte, tutti coloro che hanno criticato questa mia poesia...
All those who criticized my poem had to continually backtrack on the occasion of the death of a policeman killed either by the police, the fascists, or communists. His death brought out exactly what I had said. Power has 2 ways of bringing about a racist hatred against the poor. The first point, leave them poor and the poor person comes to be hated. Make them policemen and they're accused of being killers. The moment a poor person becomes a killer, he's open to racist hatred. This is horrible. We shouldn't experience this. I'm obviously against the police. It's the arm upon which every power structure is built. And a power structure always tends towards the right. I do, however, refuse to share in any type of racial hatred.
L'arma su cui ogni potere si fonda. I poteri sono sempre di destra. Ma quello che mi rifiuto di provare è di provare dell'odio razzistico contro i singoli poliziotti, soprattutto i giovani innocenti.
Pasolini, a mio parere, è sempre migliore...
Pasolini is always better when he's talking about himself. We ask an artist to tell us about himself. We don't ask him to tell us about the world.
Non chiediamo a un artista che ci dica qualcosa sul mondo.
Allora, io credo però che quando avrà abbandonato
I believe that when he has abandoned certain preconceived notions about making stories, fairy tales and explanations, then he will have a more direct rapport, almost autobiographical with the camera.
con la macchina da presa,
The fusion between these 2 great personalities, the filmmaker and the writer, will give Pasolini a new vision from which we can expect great works.
truly new and original in world cinema.
Abbiamo proprio una parola
Of this I am certain.
veramente sua e nuova nel cinema mondiale. Io ho fiducia.
Alcuni in Italia hanno criticato Pasolini.
Oedipus Rex. People in Italy criticized Pasolini for not making Oedipus an intellectual, because they imagined Oedipus as such. Pasolini considers this a mistake. An intellectual seeks things out, whereas Oedipus is exactly the opposite. He is innocent. That is the thing that inspired Pasolini the most in Sophocles. The contrast between total innocence and the quest for knowledge. It isn't so much the cruelty that produces crimes, but the fact that crimes are committed because people do not understand history, life, or reality. The film is very pessimistic. By the time Oedipus gets to understand, it's no use to him. Certainly, one could always play with the hypothesis that if Oedipus had not been so fatally innocent and unconscious, if he had been an intellectual and had first sought out the truth, he might have been able to alter reality. The only hope is a cultural one, to be an intellectual. Pasolini wanted the central part, which is the main body of the film, to resemble a dream. This explains the settings and the choice of costumes, and it sets the general rhythm of the film. Pasolini is basically irrational and innocent like Oedipus, and at bottom, ignorant. Pasolini met Ninetto d'Avali by chance when he was making La Ricotta. Ninetto was with a whole lot of boys watching Pasolini direct the film, and he noticed him at once because of his curly hair and his carefree personality. When he thought of making 𝖯𝖾ɪ 𝖯𝖺yi𝖾, Pasolini decided on him and Toto without the slightest hesitation.
I remember he said, "Do you want a part in the film?" And myself replying, "Okay." Then he said, "You know, it's only a very small part, and I mean small." So I took it at that. And instead, it turned out to be a part with Toto, Italy's most famous comic. Imagine my surprise with a star like that. Of course, I accepted. And so The Hawks and the Sparrows was my first film. I was only 16 when I made it. It had little success. Maybe people didn't understand it. So after that, I started to make other films. The Streghe, Capriccio all'Italiana, Oedipus Rex, Theorem, and many others. He's the only person I know in whom I can confide. For me, Pasolini is like a brother. It amuses me to make films. I also have to earn some money, but the rest really doesn't interest me. I like Pier Paolo a lot. He's a very sincere person. He's a real friend. He's a type who's very easy to get along with. He gets on well with people, especially people from the slums.
Cioè un tipo niente, un tipo che sta bene con te, con tutti quanti, capito? Sta bene con la gente del popolo, sta bene con la gente di quelle borgate.
Alberto Moravia, one of Italy's leading writers and certainly the foremost authority on Pasolini and his works.
Io Alberto Moravia.
Pasolini, Pier Paolo Pasolini is an exceptionally gifted artist. All of his work has a poetic influence. He is one of the most important poets we have in Italy today. What is his originality? In Italy, we've had for the last century something which is called civic poetry, pertaining to the world of politics, culture, humanity. It has always tended towards the right, conservative and nationalistic. The great originality of Pasolini is that of making civic poetry tend towards the left, making a fusion between Marxism and social decadence. It has the great originality and quality of having absorbed all aspects of everyday living. The novels and the films of Pasolini resemble each other. But since Pasolini has become a filmmaker, he no longer writes novels. He makes films and writes poetry. His novels have the great merit of truthfully revealing the world of the Roman slum dweller.
It is misleading to divorce Pasolini's work in the cinema from his other work, particularly his writing, poetry, novels, and criticism. Like Robert Grillet and Kluge, Pasolini was a writer before he was a film director.
I must say, I still hold reservations on the possibility of the comprehension of Pasolini's films by the underdeveloped people to whom his message seems to be directed.
In the cinema, Pasolini began with 2 or 3 films using the same themes as in his novels. The novels are The Ragazzi and A Violent Life. They describe the Roman slums, and the films Acatone and La Ricotta are also about the slums. Pasolini also made a series of cultural films. He made films of the myths of Medea, Oedipus Rex, and Jesus Christ. These are films of a man with a great sensitivity towards painting, revealing a very figurative and pictorial content. They also show great sensibility for a contemporary interpretation of the ancient myths.
Pasolini's cinema is clearly in the tradition of Rossellini, Dreyer, and Mitsugushi, if only in its juxtaposition of the natural and the supernatural. I, Cesare Zavattini, having been watching the conflict for a number of years ever since Pasolini entered the world of filmmaking, a conflict between Pasolini the writer and Pasolini the filmmaker. It is a conflict in which Pasolini the filmmaker tries to reconcile with Pasolini the writer.
Ma fino a questo momento, a mio modesto avviso, non l'ha ancora raggiunto.
The Gospel according to St. Matthew. In Pasolini's film, The Gospel According to St. Matthew, Christ is an intellectual in a world of poor potential revolutionaries. When he told the story of Christ, he didn't see him as he really was. Had he have done so, he would not have produced a religious film because he is not a believer. He doesn't believe Christ is the Son of God. Pasolini wanted to tell the story of Christ plus 2,000 years of Christian theology. In Acatone, he was telling the story in the first person. The Gospel was not telling the story in the same way. Pasolini, a non-believer, was telling the story through the eyes of a believer. The Gospel is full of contradictions. They are essential. They enrich the story. Basically, Matthew is the most earthly of all the evangelists, and also the most revolutionary. He is the closest to understanding the problems of a historical epoch which Christ created. I remember it took Pasolini 3 years to raise the money to make the Gospel. 20th century Palestine was full of light industry and the kibbutzim, so he shot the film in southern Italy. He'd been looking for over a year for an actor to interpret the figure of Christ, and was about to choose a German actor, but met Enrique Irazoki, a young Spanish student from Madrid University. No one in Italy reads the Gospel. The film suggests that Italians begin to read it.
I had a strong love for my father until the age of 3. The fundamental task I set myself is that of being rigorously disciplined. By this I mean rigorously disciplined as an intellectual. I was decidedly a Marxist straight after the war. I had to defend myself against an excess in clarity, against an excess of familiarity and almost banality. My problem is an artistic one, a formal one, and art, as you very well know, is never clear. My films are the works of an author with very singular individual characteristics. I've never talked about the importance of the family. I'm against the family. The family is an archaic remnant. During my childhood, I had certain conflicts with my family, whose background was definitely middle class. My father represented the worst element I could imagine. It's rather difficult to talk about my relationship with my father and mother because I know something about psychoanalysis. What I can say is that I have a great love for my mother. My origins are fairly typical of petty bourgeois Italian society. I'm a product of the unity of Italy as a republic. I've never wanted to make a conclusive statement. I've always posed various problems and left them open to consideration. I've stated various times that Oedipus Rex is an autobiography. My father, who was an officer, and my mother was more or less like the woman in the film played by Silvana Mangano. I live the Oedipus complex in a kind of laboratory fashion, in an almost elementary and schematic way. When I make a film, I'm always in reality, among the trees and among the people like yourselves. There's no symbolic or conventional filter between me and reality as there is in literature. The cinema is an explosion of my love for reality. I have never conceived of making a film that would be the work of a group. I've always thought of film as the work of an author. Not only the script and the direction, but the choice of sets and locations, the characters, even the clothes. I choose everything, not to mention the music.
Quasi come in laboratorio, in maniera quasi elementare, schematica direi, ma è anche molto poco autobiografico, in quanto che la mia autobiografia in questo momento non mi interessa quasi niente.
I was going to take a swim in the river, and I saw him with a bicycle. It was in 1950, straight after he came to Rome. Well, we started to talk, and he told me he was a writer, and I said, so am I. I felt instinctively that this man was a genius. But he was true and real. Each of us has to have the courage to accept a person in whom we can believe, who gives one faith. I believe in Pasolini, and he has given me a lot of faith. If I hadn't known him, I might have become a thief or a gangster. Who knows? It's really very difficult to talk about Pasolini. Pasolini wrote scripts with me because I came from the slums. He even gave me the courage to become a film director. And he told me, you'll see, Sergio, you'll be subjected to racism like your brother Franco.
Lui, Pasolini, ha dato il coraggio di fare addirittura il regista, dove mi aveva detto, vedrai Sergio, sarai soggetto di un razzismo, come è stato tuo fratello, sarai tu. Uno addirittura ai critici, quelli del cinema italiano, che non capiscono niente.
Those Italian film critics who don't understand a thing speak badly of him. And those who speak well of him do so to attack those who speak badly of him. The critics never ask how one made a film, how many millions, how much time, what actors, nothing. They never ask a single important thing. I've just made my own film, Austria. I've used fifth-rate actors. Pasolini never has. He has used a dolly. I never have. Pasolini has used a zoom. I never have. Pasolini has moved the camera and taken pan shots. I've never moved the camera. So how can it be said that my film is out of the Pasolini school?
Pasolini ha doprato Carello, io non ho mai adoprato Carello. Pasolini ha doprato zoom, io non ho mai adoprato zoom. Pasolini ha mosso la macchina, faceva panoramiche, io non ho fatto mai panoramiche. Come si fa a divertirmi in ora di scuola? Questo quindi era già preparato.
Pasolini met Sergio Citti in 1950. Sergio helped him enormously in all his novels. He was like a living dictionary. Pasolini jotted down notes at home. Then he would go over and see Sergio and get him to check the jokes and the local slang of the Roman characters, in which he was very proficient.
I met Pasolini 15, 16 years ago. We were just kids. We were bathing in a dirty river. He came to talk, write down notes. In an instant, we were friends. I became involved in his films as an actor.
Franco Citti, the brother of Pasolini's oldest friend in Rome, Sergio Citti. He'd known him ever since he was a small boy. He was perfect for Accartone.
He told me he was going to make a film. The film was Accartone. I always wanted to go into films ever since I was a young boy. But I had no idea what filmmaking was all about. I finally realized when I had finished my first film, Accartone, and when it was shown at the Venice Film Festival. I found it very moving. Started to cry.
Mi sono pure commosso, mi sono messo a piangere.
Oedipus Rex was a very difficult film. It was the first film I'd made in costume. It was very exacting, quite different from the other films I'd made before.
Cosa vuole? Sì, una crisi religiosa molto ridicola. A 14 anni ero molto credente ancora. A un certo punto, di punto in bianco...
I've never been religious unless you can count a very ridiculous religious crisis at 14 years of age. I was still very innocent. Then from one day to the next, I didn't believe anymore. I was born Catholic by mere chance because I was born in Italy. But I was never particularly Catholic, and I came to my criticism of the church as every Italian intellectual has. I had a very agnostic upbringing, and this led me to Marxism, so therefore I arrived at it in the most obvious and natural way. The church in Italy has always been an instrument of power, but I don't think its ideological power, as opposed to its practical power, has any influence over the Italian peasant. The Italian's not religious. I don't want to say pagan because that would be generic, but he is pre-Catholic in as much as he has remained in the state in which Catholicism found him, above all in the South. Catholicism is the superficial crust over the Italian people, and I believe that it'll only take a strong confrontation to destroy these ideals. I think that the gospel is one of the many books of religious propaganda that have been written. There will come a time when the gospel will be linguistically incomprehensible to humanity. The gospel is tied to time and its historic place. The church can only survive if it continues to change and put into continual crisis its own institutionality. I'm now preparing a film on St. Paul. In the film, we bring into question not the validity of the church, but its mere mode of existence.
Cioè la Chiesa può sopravvivere soltanto se decodificandosi continuamente, mettendo continuamente...
The church will probably be able to continue for centuries to come if it creates an ecclesiastical assembly that continually negates and recreates itself. My criticism is against the church as a power as it is today. I said that when I was a boy I believed, I prayed, but it wasn't anything very serious. I think there are some facets in my character that have something of a mystifying quality. I'd say that this is part of the trauma that dominates my existence. Nature doesn't seem natural to me. It's a sort of act between me and the naturalness of nature. Philosophically, nothing I have ever done has been more fitted to me than the gospel according to St. Matthew, because of my tendency always to see something sacred and mythical and epic quality in everything, even the most humdrum, simple, and banal objects and events.
Pier Paolo Pasolini has had a major impact both on politics and the church in Italy. In making the gospel according to St. Matthew, he was directly involved with Pope John XXIII. Many people have accused Pier Paolo Pasolini of being a devout member of the Communist Party. The fact is, the relationship between the Communist Party of Italy and a cultural personality such as Pasolini or Visconti, for instance, is one of great flexibility on both sides. Thus, Pasolini writes both for the party journals and at the same time attacks the party in non-party publications.
I'm not inscribed in the Communist Party. During the Czech crisis in 1968, I was decidedly against the Russian position with all my soul. Apart from anything else, my condemnation of Russian communism dates back to 1957. The The Communist Party of Italy, in some certain consensus, contributes towards a type of restoration, a new type of restoration, which is tending towards the left. I dissent and am with the movement to the left of the Communist Party. I believe that the student movements bring a really revolutionary exigency. All the positions that are within the Communist Party of Italy are positions of an extreme purity in relation to the communist orthodoxy.
Pasolini's cinema is deeply embedded in Italian culture, which is full of contradictory traits, like Catholicism and Marxism, the two commanding ideologies which dominate Italian intellectual life, both of which have left their stamp on Pasolini. However, Pasolini's Marxism is far from being a unifying system. In his thought, it is but one of many conflicting strands, now surfacing, now submerging. There is, though, one constant, one invariant: Pasolini's uncritical attachment to the peasantry, an ideal of Marxism and childhood romanticism.
The working class, as past events have shown, both in France and Italy, have taken in hand all the possibilities of revolution. In the United States, the element referred to as the prime mover of revolution would be the dissident bourgeoisie. The world of the Italian peasant pertains in some ideological way to the third world. Meanwhile, the working class belongs to the modern world. It belongs to our time and our history. Here in Italy, the policemen, for the most part, are poor boys who come from very poor families in the South. I hope that the union confrontations and the student movement will bring us to new advances in the people's movement and in the revolutionary movement. The idea of Marxism being rational is true when it's a science, but in the moment when Marxism is action or revolution, it ceases to be rational. The moment a Marxist goes into action, purely pragmatical elements or purely revolutionary sentiments exist that contain something of a religious or mystical nature.
Pasolini has a great ability and sensitivity towards language and linguistics. And in fact, some of his most beautiful poetry is in Friulan dialect, because he comes from the Friuli.
Sera imbarlumida, dal fossale creslaga, una femmina plena cammina pel camp. Io ti riguardi, Narcis, ti vevis il color della sera, quando i campani s'assunin di muerto.